begin my argument lesson, I guess, with a little demonstration. Okay, I have a cup of water here. It's full, and usually I use clear cups because you can actually see the water, but my kids destroyed them all, so we're using these. So I'm going to pour half in here. So now, both cups are have half of the water in them, I should say. Now, my question to you, let's go with this cup first. Is this cup half full or half empty?
Half empty. I would agree.
Halfway full.
Half full, half
That's
empty?
the one that started with all the water.
Mm-hmm.
That's half full. It's half full.
What about this one?
Half full.
Half empty.
They're both half full.
So you had half full, half empty, and both.
Either or. I think they're both.
I would say the one that you're emptying is half empty and the one that you're full is half full.
Yeah, see, that's my perspective.
Yes.
I did this in another class this semester, and they totally didn't get that. Yeah, well, that's my perspective. This one was full originally, and I emptied half of it out, so it's half empty. And this one was empty originally,
That's half full.
and I filled it half full. But and then I've also gotten the answer. Well, it depends on your perspective. Are you an optimist or are you a pessimist? You know, to have, the whole proverbial is the glass half full or half empty, kind of thing. And that's kind of the joke here, is it half full or half empty. You could argue for several different possible answers, right? Depending upon your perspective. That was my argument, that this one was originally full, so now it's half empty, and this one was originally empty, so now it's half full. That would be my logic, and my argument behind why I think which is which. But argument is important. Let's try to define argument, and your book kind of starts you off with that definition. So how would you define argument? Any ideas?
Couldn't it say something about debate or not debate? Debatable?
Debatable. An argument is obviously debatable. Otherwise, it's just a statement. It's not really an argument. So it has to be something that's debatable. The temperature is 73 degrees in here. That's not really debatable, unless the thermometer, or unless the temperature gauge back there is off. Is it hot in here, or is it comfortable in here? Well, that depends. I think it's a little warm, but others, hot and cold, those are things that can be debatable. The exact temperature, not so much. It's more of a fact. Okay, so what else? How else could we define argument? Yes?
Claims with reasonings.
Pardon?
Like claims that have reason.
Claims and reasoning. Good. I'm going to put those as two separate ones. So we're making a claim or claims, maybe multiple, in our argument, and we're going to back them up with reasons. Reasons, we can also use that as support. Back up our claims. Any other things to add to this, maybe? Purpose? Yeah. What is the purpose? Purpose, question mark. What's the purpose of the argument? It should have a purpose. Otherwise, what's the point? Your book defines argument as an attempt to persuade. So we could also kind of look at that as kind of a beginning point, at least an attempt to persuade or convince someone of something, or it's an attempt to also to change people's minds. Okay, so we have an attempt to persuade or convince, has to be debatable, it has to have a claim or claims with reasons or support to back it up, and there needs to be some sort of purpose. Also, when we're thinking about arguments, some other things that we might want to ask is, who is arguing? Who is doing the argument, or who is doing the arguing? Who is the audience? Or, for whom is the arguer trying to convince or persuade? So who is this argument directed at? So who's arguing? Who's the intended audience of that argument? Is the argument based on reason, logic? Is it based on emotions? Or both? And also, another thing that you need to kind of consider when we're talking about argument is, what is the rhetorical context? Does anybody know what rhetorical context is? I'm going to give you another term to start off with. This term is rhetoric. Does anybody know what rhetoric is? Yes.
The art of finding the best available means for persuasion in any situation.
Exactly. I'm going to write this down because this is important. It is the art, notice it's not a science, it's the art of finding the best means of persuasion in any situation. Reiterate that. It's the art of finding the best available means of persuasion in any situation. That's what rhetoric is. Rhetoric is not so much taught in universities anymore, but rhetoric used to be what we would think of nowadays as kind of the English/philosophy department. There weren't English departments 100 years ago, the turn of the century. That's a relatively new invention. What was in place of it was the study of rhetoric. So it's using the language, using your communication skills to communicate effectively in every situation. So it used to be a big deal. There are still some universities and colleges that focus heavily on rhetoric, but not so much anymore. The common definition of rhetoric, which is kind of a misrepresentation of it, is empty speech. You may hear this, especially when there's an election year and there's political campaigns going on. You may hear that such and such candidate is just talking rhetoric, and it's meant as empty speech. But actually, rhetoric is not empty speech. It's speech with meaning, speech with a purpose. So, what does that have to do with rhetorical context? Rhetorical context is the context or the situation in which the argument is occurring. I'll give an example. If we were talking about, let's say, pornography. A definition of pornography in the context that we live in right now, 2011 in the United States, would be a lot different than the rhetorical context of, say, the turn of the century. Definitions of pornography would be vastly different. Or even rhetorical contexts can span various cultures as well. So there are certain cultures, even in this day and age, that have a much different meaning of what pornography would be, as opposed to what you would find in America right now. So it's context. It's the context in which the argument is occurring. So it has to do with what is happening at the time. It has to do with the time and the place and the political/social goings-on that are happening around the argument. So that's what rhetorical context is. We'll discuss this a little bit more in our next class period. But does everybody have an idea of what I'm talking about when I say rhetorical context? It's just the situation, the time frame, the social, political climate in which the argument takes place. So what I would like for you to do now, that we've discussed some of the argument a bit, let's look at our textbooks. Hopefully you have your textbooks. If you don't, just look over the person next to you. And we're looking on page 401 first. What we have on page 401 is a political cartoon. So this is not something that's going to take you forever to read. Just look at that briefly. Just the cartoon, that's all we're going to focus on, not the text around it. Well, I mean the text below it, of course, but not the rest of the textbook.